Hello, I'm Kathy O'Bear with the Center for Transformation and Change, and welcome to week one of our first month of the course, Designing, Facilitating Powerful Workshops, Equity, Inclusion, Social Justice. My hope is you found the packet of handouts already, Designing Workshops on Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. That's what we're going to be working with this month and also month two. Now, what I recommend is that you take a moment and either now or make a commitment to come back, that you complete part A of the self-assessment effective design facilitation skills. What I'd like you to do is look through each of these items, just part A, and give yourself a current capacity from 1 to 5. Rarely do you do these. 5, almost always. Now this will give you an overview of some of the skills and concepts we'll cover in the first couple months, as well as it'll help you pinpoint key competencies and strategies you want to focus on in this course. So feel free to pause the video now or commit to coming back and doing it later, and not too far later in the future. So what I want to review in the rest of this video is the next handout, 6 steps for designing workshops, but just the first one, needs assessment. Whether you're creating a brand new training or revising one you've done before, it's critical we do a thorough needs assessment as much as possible before you start developing. You know, even before you start thinking about activities. I used to design activities and workshops based on what I wanted to do or what I thought the participants did. And sometimes I just found a new shiny object, a new fun activity. And so I'd try it out on folks without much thought to their needs or hope for outcomes, much less the context of the situation in the organization, local community, nation, the world. Now, what I did may still have been useful at times, but I know I missed the mark many times. And you sometimes don't get a second chance with a group. So it's critical we do a thorough needs assessment to increase the probability of meaningful learning and change back in the work environment. So as I review the key points of the needs assessment strategies, feel free to think about a new workshop you want to develop and plan your next steps, or one you've done before and you want to revise. And you can think about, wow, I already did all those, maybe a few ideas you hadn't done. And as you move towards redesigning it, how you can get more information to help you really pinpoint the needs of the folks you want to help meet. Now, one other resource before we get started, sample questionnaire for designing a new workshop. This is Appendix A. And in there, actually, this is a worksheet I'm going to encourage you to use as you're designing a new workshop or revising one. And so the first part, some of the needs assessment questions I'll be covering here. So between that and the first part of the 6 steps to designing workshops. And then I might have had 20% new stuff that I thought about that you'll see in the slides. Now, while there's a logical order in my mind how I'm presenting these, to be honest, when I'm working with a new client or a client I've been working with, I might ask the questions in different order, different ways. But most are important to ask or understand and know the answer to before you start going. However, the truth is you might only get 10 minutes with a senior leader ask these questions, so you're going to have to prioritize. But there might be another contact person you can talk to get some of this answered. And so first, gathering information about the desired learning outcomes, the purpose of the session. So I love to gather at least the person that contacted me, but I also like to talk to at least the senior leader. Now, part of that is I've been doing this over 35 years, and so I'm wanting every training to be a part of a long-term culture change. Now, they may not see that workshop as part of an ongoing climate culture change, but I'm always thinking that way. And so I want to be talking to the senior leaders because a lot of these questions will help them start to till the soils, start to connect the dots in ways they may not have before. And instead of seeing these as one-off trainings, they're beginning to realize they need consistent, integrated, planned, strategic curriculum around professional development for all levels of the organization. But you're thinking, they just asked me to do a quick diversity training, but I want to encourage you to be thinking long-term. And so gathering information, top leaders, any of these questions will help you get there. Why do you want to offer this training? How is the session related to the strategic plan? Other operational plans that you have? Why now? I love that one. Why now? What's going on in the organization, the local community, in the industry you're in? Why now? How is this an important topic for participants? How's it going to benefit them? How's it going to benefit the organization? Any and all of those can be useful. Now, you also want to be asking them, what are the competencies you want people to develop? One way to think about, what do you want the participants to know and be able to do differently after the training session? Now, I hear that. You may want to soften it a bit and make it more they're moving in that direction, because people have such unrealistic expectations of what a 2, 4, 8, even or even a 2-day training can do. So how do you want participants to deepen their knowledge? What do you want them to deepen their capacity to do might be a more realistic way to frame that. Now, you might be familiar with Pope, Reynolds, Mueller, if you're in higher ed particularly, their books and articles around multicultural competence and student affairs. They talked about 3 of these buckets of competencies: knowledge, self-awareness, and skills. Somebody also talked about action, but I don't know. I just heard someone teaching about it and it wasn't there. So I just want to acknowledge this is not my material. And so you can actually offer these 4 buckets to your leaders, your contact person, and say, so what kind of knowledge would you like them to know more about? Self-awareness, that's information about their own assumptions, biases, their own behaviors, their own socialization. Skills, for instance, recognizing microaggressions, interrupting them, recognizing bias and policies, learning to shift them. All those are types of skills. And then action. So it's one thing to know how to do it, have the skills to do it, but what kind of action do you want them to be able to do afterward? And then as an organization, how do we assess and evaluate what they're doing, adjusts for the next level of training? Now, these are some of the content outcomes. And as you read my materials to the lesson plan, you'll see I really separate content outcomes and process outcomes. So you also want to be asking people, what do you want people to feel during the session? How do you want them to engage? And I have all those skills. Now, some people will look at you like you're from a different planet, and yet I think it's important for them to really realize that this work is about emotions, it's about life experiences, it's about biases, attitudes. And so the feelings, emotions, and how people engage is actually as, if not more critical, in my opinion, than the content you cover. People can read a book, they can watch a movie, read an article. It's that live, interactive conversations that can help open people's hearts. And so getting the leaders to really think about the process outcomes can be useful. You may also want to ask, what are some of the challenges, difficult situations that are occurring in the organization, in the team, that you want people to be able to navigate and resolve more effectively? And a final one could be, for this to be a useful investment of time and resources, what outcomes do you want to see? So you'll notice I had a whole bunch of different kinds of questions to get to the same outcome. And I have that many because some leaders can answer one question, but they don't understand what I mean by another. It depends probably on their Myers-Briggs, their work style. Plus, asking it a couple different ways builds relationship. They may begin to trust you more and then tell you more of the real truth, which I believe you need to know to design the most effective workshop. In addition, it's important to walk leaders through these questions, again, for the long-term culture change. Helps them get clear on why this is important, and that'll help them articulate why this is a critical workshop for the employees, the board, whomever they have to answer to. It gets them clear about what they need and why. And then when they ask you to do all that in an hour, you can refer back to, well, let me see what you wanted them to accomplish and learn and be able to do. And if you really want all those 6 things, a more realistic time frame is X. Now, again, they may only have an hour or a 2-hour block. However, you can negotiate a series of workshops potentially. So get back to their stated goals, their stated outcomes, competencies they want, may help you negotiate what will then help you help them get what they need from the sessions. Another thing you want to do is, and I actually do this before I talk to leaders, I want to review the values, the mission, if there's a diversity statement, if they use words like equity, inclusion, or social justice, racial justice, to see what their language is so that I mirror their language and maybe nudge a little bit. I want to find their strategic plan. And so I might say, can you send me all these things? And then let's talk again about the learning outcomes you want. Because you really want to identify the current organizational context. And so some quick questions might be, how does this training prepare employees to achieve our strategic goals, our customer service? And you want to understand all that before you have the conversation, ideally, because then if they're not getting the connections, you can say, well, in the mission statement, we talk about X. And that might prompt them to see the connections and connect the dots. And it might motivate leaders to really take this seriously, move forward if they realize you've really gotten into what they say they want to be. They may not be living it, but at least what their stated outcomes and goals and missions are. Asking these questions can help them get it's not just a nice thing to do, but it's critical to our success. Again, we're tilling the soil for organizational change. And so that other question on the slide, what are the specific parts of our values, mission, vision that directly talk about the intended outcomes you want for the workshop? Another reason you're asking that question is you're going to want one of these senior leaders, in my opinion, to open the session 2-3 minutes, not 5, not 10, just 2 or 3 minutes. We'll talk about that in a subsequent video about how to do an opening. But to get them already thinking about how is what we say we're about related to this workshop, and so that they can talk beforehand, during the session, and after. Another way to do needs assessment is you want to find out what are all the different recent trainings the group has experienced, in person, as online, conferences. I like to know who's got what kind of knowledge, because I really want to know the strengths, content, interaction, design that they want me to build upon. And then really I need to know any concerns that happened during the workshop or after. And that's critical that I know those things, so that I can be prepared. And so a few other questions you may want to ask, what were all the different topics? And not only just on equity inclusion, but there may have been something on conflict or communication or supervision, and ask how were those related to, were the participants in their roles, responsibilities, having to think about equity inclusion with respect to whatever the topics are. And particularly if there are any diversity workshops, how are they being challenged to create, maintain an inclusive, respectful organization for all members, all clients? When I say all, I mean all. So you may want to be asking, what were the specific categories of difference that were talked about? The other presenters may have been prepared to talk about 20 or 30 like I do, but there might have just been a couple that took up most of your time. And again, that's all good information for you to know. I like to ask for copies of the PowerPoints, handouts, pre-readings, pre-work. If there's any post-work, I want to see what people did. Now, to be honest, I may not read everything, because when I'm doing this a long time, I can kind of glance at things and get a sense. And then I want to ask, what percentage of folks you think actually did the pre-readings or the post-work, the homework? You might also want to ask about evaluations. How did people respond during the session, after? Were there any flashpoints, any critical incidents? And then I like to know the degree of participation past. Is it a more reflective, introverted group? When there are senior leaders or supervisors in the room, do people show up, or is there kind of a fear-based lack of engagement when there are supervisors in the room? Or do people sit back and are quiet, especially in their privileged identities? What kind of conflict resolution skills do people have, and have they demonstrated those in workshops? Is it mostly avoidance of the topic? I want to know the common group dynamics that happen during. So those are all things I like to know. I also like to know observable results. What skill development, knowledge development did you start to see in the session? Did people start using the terms and concepts? Did they start engaging in dialogue more effectively? Did they start questioning how to take it back to the workplace? But mostly I want to know after the session, what observable results, impact have you seen? And if people look at you with a blank face, that's not unusual. But again, at least the session will be helping you develop. It is about demonstrated increased capacity and competence. This isn't just about knowledge that people can find interesting. It's getting it into the daily work activity. So we're changing our practices, our policies, culture, climate norms. So want to be asking, what have you seen so far? And clearly that last bullet, I will be repeating throughout these 6 months. How did supervisors follow up and reinforce the learning? And they'll probably say it depends on the supervisor. You can say, well, as we move forward, are there some ways you think you want to have the supervisors required to help accelerate the application of the skills to the work environment? And again, if they look at you like they don't know what you're talking about, you can offer a few ideas. And we'll cover this in a subsequent session. But you're planting seeds for success in the session as well as afterwards. because these one-shot deals, they're not going to move the needle. And I think you're going to want to be a part of ongoing professional development that's strategic and planned and very intentional. So any of this will help leaders begin to think in these ways. At some point, you do want to ask about, is this group used to doing pre-work? And if so, what kind do they have? Have they done homework? And again, how do they debrief with their supervisor and the team? One of the best ways, I think, even if just 2 out of the 20 people go to a workshop, have them come back and share insights. Again, not names, not stories people told and the names involved, but the learnings and how they want to apply it in the work environment. And then if you have 2 people every month going to a similar workshop, you're coming back, you're helping the whole team develop. So by the time the last members go, and sometimes they're the last people because they're maybe the ones that either don't want to go or wish they could get out of it. I'm generalizing, but there's something to that. By then they realize the supervisor is talking about this, it's part of their performance review. And so they're like, okay, they're no longer reluctant participants, or at least not as reluctant. And so these are all great questions. You don't have to decide these in the first conversation you have or the second you have with the people that ask you to do it, but you may want to ask them if they have any ideas. It could be they've got an article they just read or a quick YouTube video they saw that they thought was great. Now, review and read everything, because this will have your name on it. And so I want to make sure that what I use, I've gone over and it reflects and is integrated into the learning, teaching, and how I'm teaching. Too often, the more mainstream, sometimes these clips have more problems with them than they do usefulness. Not saying don't use them, but you want to use them thoughtfully and maybe not as pre-work. All right, deep breath. We're about halfway through. Another way to do needs assessment is you want to discuss how the session fits into the overall plan for training and development. What types of reinforcement are they going to do, of learning, what types of follow-up activities, how it's connected to performance plans and performance appraisals, how it's connected to the competencies they want all employees to have. And what you'll find in most organizations is these are holes in the HR systems. But again, you're planting seeds, and then maybe they want to ask you to help them think about how could they get those aligned so that it really is a competency-based hiring, selection process, training process, evaluation process, everything flows together. But that might be longer term. But again, training as intervention can be culture change. And then future sessions, what are they thinking about, next steps? Now, if they don't have any, it's all right, it's good to know. And then while you're doing the training, you may be thinking about what else. And then at the end, you can be asking participants what else they want to learn and grow in other topics. And so you can offer that back to your leader, to the people that brought you in if you're coming in from the outside. At some point, you want to clarify if participation is mandatory or voluntary or voluntold, highly encouraged, but then I would ask, what's the real message people are taking? Even if the president said, I highly encourage you to go, it's the message you need to go or else. So just, it's good to know that impacts how I want to design, especially how I start the workshop. And then I just want to know the rationale. I may not have an opinion either way, but I want to make sure they've thought through the rationale and the pros and cons of the options. So I want to walk them through it, have them talk to me about what they're thinking is. And if it's still a little malleable or fuzzy, if you have a personal opinion, you may want to help emphasize it. I also like people to send me organizational charts, bios of key leaders if they're going to be in the room, and job descriptions if I'm not familiar. If I'm doing work in higher ed, that's my background, and especially over these years, there's still some stuff I don't know, but not much. But I still might want to look at, for sure, bios. I did some work with the president and her executive cabinet, and I asked for them, and there were 16, but I read all 16 bios, and it was great because when I was in it, I could remember a few things, not everything, but it shows people that I did my homework as I talk about their values, their mission, sorts of things. All of that can help people that are a little resistant or a lot resistant realize at least you're showing up, so maybe they will. Now, these next ones, maybe what is more familiar to people if you've been doing training before, you really want to gather information about the learning needs of participants. Now, you can do this by asking the people that brought you in. You can also do a survey of participants. But I want to know for sure the number they expect. You know, it's usually within plus or minus 10%. The roles, job functions, I want to know if they're supervisors, leaders in the room. If there are large groups from a particular team, I think I remember doing 6 one-day foundational workshops at one university, but some of them were mostly all faculty, others were mostly dining and police. And so I adjusted my opening as well as how I framed some activities, and also helped me prepare. And then I usually ask in the opening, we'll cover this later, who is the supervisor in the room? Who is a supervisor? Have you talked with each other about that to negotiate learning guidelines and norms? But I want to know before I go in, and even before I'm designing, who's in the room. I want to know their current capacity. And so I'll ask questions. As you get to know me, I'm a 0 to 10 person, maybe a 1 to 5, but that's about a Likert scale, is about all I do. And so what's their current knowledge from very low 0 to very high 10? Current demonstrated capacity to do X, and I might throw out a few of the learning outcomes that I'm thinking of already, maybe. Can they recognize microaggressions, interrupt them in the moment afterwards? Can they recognize subtle racist comments, coded racist language in search committees? I mean, whatever the topic is, just come up with a few and ask and get and people say it depends. So just give me a range. That'll help me design, because I would design very different workshops for an organization if the participants are early in their awareness and capacity to demonstrate skills, middle or high. Might use the same activities, but very different emphasis as we're teaching, and then maybe some different activities as well. I want to know their attitudes in general towards training. I don't care the topic. What's the climate and culture around training, particularly about diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice training, and then particularly about this one that's coming up. Their degree of openness, their willingness to engage fully, to be authentic, and then what resistance do you anticipate? Again, we already asked for past workshops, but I find that the longer I can chat with a leader or the people that bring me in and build that relationship, they get more honest over time, especially as I say, this is really common, that's really helpful. Can you say more about this? It's great you told me that, because I need to know as much as I can so that I can design a workshop that's like a hand and glove for what they need. I want to know what leaders want the learning outcomes to be, but I also want to ask that of the participants, if we can. What do they hope to learn? And you can do that a number of ways. It could be a survey where you ask that open-ended, or you give them 5 microaggressions, and 0 to 10, how comfortable would you be speaking up, and how skilled do you think you are? You know, that's kind of a learning outcome, and you can kind of get a flavor of where they are and what they think they want. Plus, that increases maybe their willingness to come and learn, because they see this isn't being lectured to. It's actually maybe going to be skill-based and practical. I want to know their preferred learning styles. And again, you can get a little bit of that from the people that want to bring you in and what the past workshops have been. But I find most people do a lot of knowledge and lecture. And even though I'm doing that in these videos, what you'll find is the activities are so experiential. And so it's like, how have participants seemed to learn best? Kinesthetic, applied, experiential, engaged learning, conceptual, abstract, theory. Are they auditory learners, visual learners? Now, you know, when you're designing, we'll talk about this another time, you want to have your activities meeting all of those learning styles. And yet, if they can give you any insights on what's been most useful, are simulations, how they learn, and the debriefing. Do they do well in small groups, one-on-one? Is this a group that does well in a large group? Now, if you're going to do a participant survey and asking these questions, you want to ask maybe what are their hopes and concerns? What do you hope to learn, and any concerns? Again, preferred style of learning, teaching methods they like. And clearly you want to get information about accessibility. I ask every person that brings me in to send out in an email all the logistics, and then somewhere highlighted, are there any ways that we can increase the accessibility of the learning materials for you? And if so, what would that be? Now, there might be other ways to phrase that. You may want to talk, if you have a disability services organization in your organization or in HR, to get the language that they're using. But we're talking about universal design, and we'll talk more about that in subsequent videos. But I need to know, and I believe you do, what might be the needs around folks that are visually, hearing, mobility issues, learning disabilities. Now, not everybody will tell you, and if you don't get a chance to get participant input, The people that bring you in may or may not know. So again, you want to be prepared for open accessibility, and it helps me get ready to know if I'm going to have someone who's using an interpreter or someone that uses a cane to move around, either because they're visually impaired or, excuse me, walking for them, they use a cane or a walker or a chair. So all that helps me be prepared to rethink activities in the moment, and also be prepared beforehand to think, that activity, let me adjust. And then I learned this the hard way. I am embarrassed to say, but I assumed most people were English language learners. I was working with a group in a university in residence life, and they said, well, about 20% of our folks are Laotian or Chinese, and English is not their second language. They're English language learners, but very early in the process. And so we'll have interpreters. And I kind of said, okay, never done it before. Same organization, I had some folks we were able to work with who Spanish was their co-language. They grew up with English and Spanish, and they were fluent and bilingual. And so we had bilingual participants, trainers. So we had some sessions that were done in Spanish and many done in English with translation, as well as some in English with no translation. And people got to choose. The other thing I learned in my just not paying attention was I was doing a foundational workshop with some folks, and they told me a little bit before. Now, some of these folks may not have English at the high school grade level. They may not be able to write or read. Now, these were folks born in the U.S. English was their only language, and yet I was so used to working in corporations, as well as universities and middle and upper level managers or with students, that I hadn't thought that some of the staff in some of our organizations may not. And so how do you redesign so no one feels embarrassed, or so they don't have to be able to read at a high school level, and you don't have as much text on your slides, not much text handouts, and a lot of it's auditory and visual with graphics and movies and videos, those sorts of things. So things to think about. All right. This also might look familiar. You're probably already gathering demographic information. And this is a list. It's not a complete list, but it's what could fit. But it's really most of the ones that I ask about. And there might be some others. I often ask, so what are the demographics of your organization? I listen to them first. Then I might ask, what are the pain points? What are the topics that are harder to talk about? Or what are folks that are members of marginalized identities that are asking for more training or policy changes? So I'll be listening to that. And I don't think I ever have surveyed this. That could have people have resistance before they get in the room. But asking, given what they know from demographics, from other surveys, or just what they know from apparent identities, as well as anything else what people might have said, as much as you know. Again, we've talked about English proficiency and disability status. I really want to understand racialized identities, educational background, sex assigned at birth, sexuality, gender identity. Talked about hierarchical job function, one who's in the room. Depending on your organization, it might be important to have the trainer know about national origin, nationality, immigration status, kind of that glump. Now that workplaces often have 4, sometimes 5, if not more generations in the workplace, knowing age and then dynamics around each of these is good to talk about. I don't have children, so I forget about parental status. So that might be important to know, especially if it's a pain point. And I forget to ask about religion, spirituality, but I'm often at a few Jesuit colleges, and I was just at one that was started by folks who are Jewish, as well as one that's in a very Mormon state. I've realized lately I need to ask that question more, because the local national context, as well as the current mission, values, how it's related to whatever religion or spirituality is related to the organization. But if this is a nonprofit, or you work in a corporation or a K-12, it's still good to know, in my opinion. And then, of course, socioeconomic class that's related to hierarchy, but I also want to know the socioeconomic class of, especially if there are any pain points. So take a deep breath, just a bit more. Again, you're probably already thinking about this, but sometimes I forget. I want in writing the date, the day, and the location, and start and end times. I showed up somewhere, I swear they had said on the phone 4 hours. an executive team. I get there, it's only 3. And so I had to do significant cutting on the spot. So it's helpful to know and ask several times. Early on, I want to get them ready to think about what senior leader can come welcome and frame the session. I want to talk to that person so I can offer them some talking points, clarify all the supplies you want, how they're going to duplicate handouts and when they need them, and then what's their evaluation process. I don't usually offer evaluations. Often people, it's part of their assessment, so they have people already in the organization. So I might offer ideas or say, send me what you usually use, and I might add something. I want to get away from the smiley. Again, we'll talk about this one of the videos. Did you like it or not? I want to know what were the key aspects that were useful. How you intend to use this? Any other issues or questions you want to talk about? Any concerns or input or feedback you have for the facilitator? Those sorts of things. All right. And all these are important to clarify, because if I forget, then I don't have the room set up I need. And there might be more for you, but you may want to make yourself your own checklist in case there's other things you always want. I know as an external consultant on my contract, I list all these and then I kind of check off which ones I want for that specific one, just to make sure they understand. I'll follow up with an email. So I'm often just in one room, but sometimes I use small group breakout rooms. So making sure they're close by and accessibility dynamics, not too long to get there. You want to make sure kind of chairs and tables. So everything I'll be offering you is a lot of moving around and or lean over, find somebody. And so chairs that can move so people can turn and face each other. I do find some people like tables, and so I have eased up on my no table rule lately. And so tables of 4 to 6, yes, you can have that big ones that are 8 or 10, but I try to only put like 7 or 8 chairs at each one. I think groups of 10 are far too big at a table, so I kind of like 6. But I am finding that tables, if there's enough room so people using a chair or walker or cane can move through, can be ways that people are facing each other, and then I move people among tables. So I'm fine with tables if that's their culture. But I want to make a comment. I've been asked lately about having chairs in the languages for people of size. That's what some participants are asking for. So I've never negotiated this before, but I want to offer that was a new insight a couple of weeks ago. And I watched some people in a 5-day workshop I was co-leading just work as hard as they can to be comfortable in some of those real traditional chairs that might be soft for me, but for someone who was a larger size than I am, or a larger size than the chair was thought of. And I find more and more folks would benefit from having a variety of different kinds of chairs in the room. And again, if you're setting up chairs, you want to make sure you leave space for someone using a wheelchair, because you may or may not know beforehand. Really talking about audiovisual needs, I mostly only need capacity for a PowerPoint. I need to know if they're going to have the computer, if they want me to bring mine, if they have the right connectors. I always make sure I bring them, but maybe I lost them, so I ask for them. If you use internet capacity to show YouTube or video or something, you can tell I don't do that much because I don't know what you would do with it. But there are so many great videos, and we'll probably talk later. Francesca Ramsey, Jay Smooth, I keep going. Just some wonderful pieces of videos. And I like John Quinones's work on What Would You Do? And Shakti Butler has a number of videos, and the one I love, Dr. Joy DeGruy, talking about the grocery store, and you can get that online. So, but you do want to make sure your videos are captioned. That's something that I don't think about as consistently, but make sure if you're going to use something either off the internet or you're bringing it in, it's captioned. And you can remember that helps with people with different learning needs as well as English proficiency. And maybe there might be other issues. I know sometimes I'm so distracted, I may not be listening to the video, but if I'm reading and listening at the same time, I get a lot out of it. You want to talk about meals and breaks, and to be honest, I'm very clear. I was about to say I ask, but I'm pretty clear on the kinds of beverages and foods I want. A balance. People always want to serve sugar, especially in the afternoon, just people get high and then they crash. So I always want to make sure there's a nice variety for people like me that don't do sugar, that don't do wheat. and to make sure if there's a lunch involved, it's easy and quick for people to get, and good proteins and greens. Again, I'm not, people want something else, you have a nice variety, but I just really want to make sure it's a nice, healthy meal if that's what people want to eat, and we're modeling it. You want to ask where the bathrooms are, and I'll always ask if they can have the training in a site where there's a pretty close, inclusive, all bathroom with a locked door. So a single stall bathroom with a locked door, and if there's several, that's better. And that you know where they are, so you can direct people to the gender binaries, male, female ones, as well as ones that are all inclusive. And the more we have all inclusive restrooms, the more I realize how many people have their needs met in those around gender identity, around issues of disability, around possibly parenting, many different reasons people might use an all-inclusive restroom. And then finally, music. I'm not recommending it. I probably should do it more, but be asking if they have the capacity to play music. The last thing I want to talk about, you'll hear me talk about LCY Cross Associates off and on. They were a consulting firm. I got to join around 1991, maybe about 15 years, had a chance to work with them before they closed. Just lots of wisdom and insights that I've been able to weave in, and you'll see me cite the materials in the handouts. So it's the first time, it was probably mid to late 90s, somewhere in there, I heard some of the key leaders talking about context before content. And I had no idea what in the world they were talking about. However, over time, and hearing some of my other colleagues talk about it, and especially these last 3 years, if not longer, probably since Ferguson, been much more aware of the national context, local, and the organizational context, the overall climate and culture with respect to equity, inclusion, diversity, as well as all the other rings that I just laid out, what's going on lately. Now, people may not be able to answer those questions, but for you watching the local news, for you watching national news, I get mine from Facebook a lot, just seeing what's going on so that in that moment, if something happened the day before that morning, it's impacting people, because with social media, if it happens at halfway through the workshop, I am watching my phone to see if anything's going on that is impacting people in the room. But asking the leadership contact, what's the overall degree of engagement? How do people feel about this organization, the level of fear, morale, trust? Because if it's low, if there's low trust of leaders, low trust of HR, low trust of supervisors, a lot of just team dysfunction, then coming in a diversity workshop, there's probably all kinds of resistance, because they're like, why should I think about it, people different from me, when I'm being treated less than because of? So just knowing that can help you design. I also want to know, are there any recent major changes announced or anticipated or feared? Layoffs, firings, budget cuts, reorganizations, all that is helpful. And again, if there's any data that can help you with the overall climate, I like to glance at those survey data. Now, this may be starting to feel onerous. So I'm not saying I spent hours and hours, but the day before, and then I prep for the workshop, reviewing some of this material, but clearly before I start designing, I ask the questions and I look through this before I kind of, what would be useful. I also want to know team dynamics, especially if they're a specific team. If it's a whole organization, but if it's a particular division, tell me about team dynamics, group dynamics that are relevant. Are there silos, dysfunctional dynamics? How effectively do supervisors and managers set very clear expectations for productive behavior, performance, team work? And how do they hold people accountable? Performance management. And often people, again, look at me like, what? And I find most organizations I get asked to work with just do not do performance management well. And so I just need to know that, because as I'm talking about holding people accountable for competency development, people are like, we don't do that on anything. And so it's just good to know. A few more. I want to know, what are the critical incidents in the organization, the local community? That might be important to consider. I asked this the other day, what are the elephants in the room? And leaders told me something that I should have known weeks before. And I'd asked these questions. So again, I like to talk to the people that brought me in, try to then talk to senior leaders. And over time, you might get more information as more trust builds. But if I had not known that, there would have been landmines that I would have stepped on in that room. So building relationships and trust to get to know. Other cultural change efforts that are happening. Often when we're talking about equity inclusion, folks are like, I don't have time, this is too hard. We don't do change. So I want to know if they've done, if they changed over to PeopleSoft or some other new management system. Did they start a new budgeting system? Any type of change that involved getting people to change their practice, whatever it is, customer service change. Even if it was 5 years ago, then I can reference that. Maybe they got new computers lately, a new software program. We always want to talk about how change is not always easy for everyone. In fact, most of us, it takes us a little while to get used to it, and yet remind them of the different culture change efforts they've done successfully or hopefully, and you can reference that. And finally, organizational initiatives support not only strategic plan, but other initiatives, credibility, what's it called, accreditations, just anything that's coming up or has happened recently. You want to know the motivators, the levers for change. That's the things you're looking for. All right, take a deep breath. So again, even if you don't know all this, asking the leaders helps them to connect the dots and prepare to lead. I was a Girl Scout. I guess once you're a Girl Scout, you're always a Girl Scout. But the motto, be prepared. That's what I like about comprehensive needs assessment, because when I know as much as I know, then I'm not as anxious. I design much more effectively. And if something happens in the moment I hadn't planned for, I have this whole background of information that I can flex and flow much more easily. So design is actually related to facilitation. So the deeper, more comprehensive your needs assessment, it increases the possibility for greater learning in the session and greater transfer of learning back into daily work activities to change the practices, the climate. So one last deep breath. My guess is as you look at the materials, as you review this video, maybe again, you'll have questions. And don't forget, we'll have twice a month, we'll have live Q&A calls just for members of the course. And then that Q&A forum, you can always send in emails. I get an email that you sent one in. I'll answer it either there or in the next Q&A forum. And even if you can't attend in that next live Q&A, you'll get the video and the recording. So happy needs assessment, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care.